Oh hey YouTube, what's really good? My name is Vivid and today I'm going to do something I haven't done in a hot minute, and that is give you a tier list video to watch. Why am I doing this, you might ask? Well, because I know that everybody's been missing my super spicy opinions. Okay, no, seriously, that's not the reason. The real reason is I need content to upload in between my hardcore Nuzlocks. I love doing those, but they take a lot of time. If you don't know, I've said it in a few videos recently, I'm a new father. Sometimes my time is limited, so I'm going to be experimenting with new content to give you in between. If you enjoy these types of videos, please let me know by leaving a like. Also, subscribe if you're new here, that would help out the channel immensely. All of that out of the way, let's set up a little bit of a criteria for this tier list. This is going to be ranking all of the types for specifically a hardcore Nuzlocke and in the confines of doing a monotype run for that hardcore Nuzlocke. Like, how viable is it? How easy will it be to beat the Nuzlocke? How viable is this specific type in a monotype hardcore Nuzlocke? I hope I've hammered that home. So with that being said, you have to understand that there's going to be a little bit of nuance here because each generation is different. I'm not going to be rating the viability for each generation because then everything would be viable in like Gen 8, but almost nothing would be viable in Gen 1, for instance. So I'm just going to be rating the viability sort of like as a whole. I'll kind of talk about it. I'll give my opinions. Let me know what you agree with and what you disagree with in the comment section down below, but let's just get into this. Okay, so this is the tier list I have set up. If you want to do this with me, there will be a link in the description down below. Please feel free to do this and then tweet me the image of your tier list. I would love to see them. Also, if you think I'm an absolute idiot for my picks, let me know in the comment section down below as well, because that is interaction and the algorithm likes those things. I promise I will heart your mean comments. Okay, so to kind of break down the tier list here, we have easy dubs. These are types that it should be an easy win. It should be a really low chance of failure. Maybe if you make misplays, if you get crit out of the game, if you get hacks, you might lose, but it should be an easy win. V good, just very good, super solid. This type should get a pretty easy win. The sweet spot, I'm calling it the sweet spot, and I think that this is kind of where you want to be for at least like most runs, unless you want a super easy run or a super difficult run. The sweet spot is going to be a good mix of this is difficult and also, this is not difficult. It's just going to depend on where you're at in the game. Struggle bus is, you're riding the struggle bus. This is going to be a hard type to do a monotype hardcore Nuzlocke run with. You're going to have a rough time. And then lol rip is, this might not even be viable. Good luck, have fun. All right, let's do this. Starting off with the bug type, you are riding the struggle bus with the struggle bugs, or you're riding the struggle bus and using struggle bug. You get the joke I'm trying to make. Bug types, they're okay. They're not bad. Normally, they're pretty plentiful in the early game, or at least there's like one or two different ones that you can get. And, they evolve really quickly, but they don't have very high base stat totals. And they also have really common weaknesses. In a lot of generations, your first big challenge is like a rock type gym. What is that? Like Gen 4, Gen 3, Gen 1, and Gen 2, it's a flying type gym. You get the point. It's going to be hard. It's going to be rough getting through the early game, and then once you get into the mid game, there's normally not a lot of powerful options. Bugs don't typically have the best coverage. The really, really solid bugs like Scizor are not available in standard rules unless you turn on impossible evolutions for your run, which a lot of people don't do. I've been doing it. I think it's a good thing to do. The moral of the story is bugs are going to have a hard time. If you want a challenge, this looks like it. I'm not gonna say it's low rip because normally there are a lot of bugs, and sometimes just having like quantity over quality is decent in these runs. But yeah, the bug type's gonna be rough. Moving into the dragon type, despite how powerful it may be, the biggest bottleneck you're going to have is how many dragon types are available. But I know where a ton of dragon types are available, and that is from today's sponsor. So take it away, Vivid, from a slightly different time. Wait, hold on. Y'all are talking about dragons and saying they're scarce? Well, then let me talk to you about Dragon City. Dragon City is a mobile RPG available on both Android and iOS devices where you can collect, breed, train, and battle over 1,000 dragons to build your perfect dragon empire. Are you interested in breeding 2 dragons to create an entirely new dragon and then feed that dragon to have it evolve? You can do that. Are you interested in training your dragons and having them battle so that your entire empire becomes more powerful? You can do that. Or maybe you're interested in different PvP modes that allow you to battle your friends and other dragon masters to see who has the superior draconic forces. Well, You can do that. Seriously, if you're interested in strategy combat games and monster collectors, which I'm assuming you are because you clicked on this video, then Dragon City is for you. And best of all, as a bonus for new users, if you click my custom link in the description down below over the next 7 days, you will start off your adventure with 30,000 free gold, 15,000 free food, and 10 gems, which is a fantastic deal. Seriously, this is a deal you don't want to miss out on, so go ahead and click that link in the description down below, go download Dragon City, and in the future we can square off and see whose dragons are superior. Thank you so much, Dragon City, for sponsoring this video. Thank you once again, Dragon City, for sponsoring this video and helping me continue producing content. Okay, continuing with the dragon type, honestly, there just aren't a lot of dragons available. Like, this run is impossible in Gen 1. You don't get a dragon type until really late. If you start the game off with Dratini, you're just solo running the game. I don't know how possible that is with hardcore Nuzlocke rules. In Gen 2, no new dragon types were added. Gen 3, you have more dragon types, but none are available early. Gen 4, same boat, none of these are available early. There's not a wide variety of them in the region. Gen 5, it goes up the chain. They're not available early. I think this is viable in Gen 6 if you allow yourself to change the starter, or if you just beat the first gym. I think it's viable in Gen 6. I'm pretty sure it's viable in Gen 7, again, if you allow yourself to change the starter. There are enough viable dragons that you can catch early in the game that you can make this work. And then in Gen 8, everything's viable. I think for the most part, you're gonna... It's close to Lol Rip. It's really close to Lol Rip, but it's probably at the bottom of Struggle Bus. You have to almost always modify the rules, I think, to make this work. At least if you want to fight like the first gym or the first island trial with an actual dragon type, you're gonna have to modify the rules because there's no dragons that you can catch before the first gym outside of like Gen 8, right? Gen 8, everything's viable. You can do whatever because of the way the wild area works. Dark types. Dark types are solid. I think dark types are good. I don't think they're very good because a lot of the like really top tier, top echelon dark types you won't get until very later in the game, like much later. I think they're kind of the sweet spot where the early game is going to be pretty tough. The early game is going to be pretty tough, but if you can kind of muscle through it or kind of use your strategies to get through sort of the early game challenges and unlock some of the better dark types later on, I think you have a fun run on your hands. This is one that I would try, and it's viable in a lot of generations. Not 1 and 2, but like 3 and onwards. I think this is probably viable. I don't know if there's an early dark type in Gen 4 now that I think about it, but still, I think this is viable overall, and it's going to be viable in most of the more modern generations. I would love to try this. Electric, we just did, and now that I say that out loud, I'm realizing people might be like, who is this guy to rank all the types when he's only done 2 or 3 mono type runs? I have a lot of experience with Pokemon. I've been playing the games forever. I've done mono Nuzlocks or monotype Nuzlocks like off screen by myself. I have a lot of competitive experience, and those are my credentials. You're just going to have to accept it. This one I think is the sweet spot. In most generations, you can normally get an electric type early. There's normally enough electric type encounters throughout a region for you to sort of like fill up a team. I think this is a good one. I did this one recently and it was in Gen 7 and Gen 6 and onward. Like, the encounter diversity is really, really good. So normally you can make a team out of most any type. But yeah, I think electric is going to be good in most generations. It might not be possible in 1 or 2. Yeah, I think it is in 2, right? You can get a Mareep early on. If you can get a Mareep early on, then it's probably possible. I don't know. I think this one's the sweet spot because electric types, you know, they're interesting. They're really fast normally. Good special attackers. They only have 1 weakness, but no bulk. No bulk to speak of, but only having 1 weakness is kind of big game. And also there are really solid electric types like Magnemite that you can find throughout regions that will kind of help you just because steel types are really good in hardcore Nuzlocks. Okay, so the fairy type is up next, and this one isn't even usable until Gen 6 and onward, just because the fairy type didn't exist. But I think in every generation that you can use the fairy type in, it's probably going to be easy dubs. In Gen 7, you get a starter that turns into a fairy type. That's good. You also have things like Cutie Fly early on that are really, really solid, like fast special attacking fairies. I'm trying to remember if there are any other early fairies. I can't for the life of me right now. Mr. Mime Jr. I think is pretty early, which is pretty big game. Also in Gen 6, I think you would have to modify Gen 6 to either start with a fairy or you just have to beat the first gym. I don't think there's a fairy, or maybe Azurill. You can catch Azurill before the first gym. The moral of the story is, a lot of the fairies that you can get in these games are really strong. I think that the fairy type, I think it's going to be easy dubs. I think it's going to be easy dubs. The fairy type is strong. You have access to really, really strong encounters. And I think that the fairy type can plow through a lot. It's really good offensively. It's really good defensively. And you have access to just like a ton of stellar Pokemon. Things like Azumarill, really, really good. Gardevoir, really, really good. You have really good, like a really good balance of like offense and defense. Like even Mawile is not a great Pokemon without its Mega Evolution, is really solid for just a run through of the game, especially if you go in with Intimidate. So yeah, I think fairies are easy dubs. The fighting type, this one is probably somewhere in between very good and the sweet spot. I don't think you're riding the struggle bus. I think this is probably viable in most generations. I think there's an early fire type you can get before the first gym, like in Gen 1 you can get Mankey. I don't think there's one in Gen 2. Gen 3 you can get Shroomish, and I guess you can start with Torchic. You kind of have to modify the rules to make it to where you can use pre-evolutions that aren't fighting types yet. I think this one's probably very good. The selection of fighting types is normally really high. They're really strong physically. Actually, you know what? They don't have great coverage in the later generations, but they do in the newer generations. I think that's going to balance out to where they're very good. I think fighting types in the newer generations are super good because once you get the special physical split, all the elemental punches are nuts. They almost all get like rock type coverage, so they can kind of like cover the flying types that they're weak against. A lot of them get dark type coverage to kind of beat out the psychics. You have things like Riolu. Riolu you can catch early in a lot of the generations. Like you can get Riolu early, and I think Black 2, White 2, you can also get it very early in X and Y. I think the fighting type's very good. Also, you can get Hawlucha, I think right after your first trial in Sun and Moon, and Hawlucha I think can solo the entire game. So yeah, I'm gonna put fighting types in very good. Okay, so next I'm gonna do these 3 in a row. I think these are all kind of like an alphabetical order maybe, but Fire, Water, Grass we're gonna do kind of like sequentially because obviously the starters. So I think all of these are semi-viable just because if you want to play with the starter you can, right? Like if you do mono grass, you have a grass type starter, and you know, down the line. I think the one that is going to be hard is fire. Grass types, there's almost always some kind of viable grass type encounters early that you can pick up at least before sort of like your second gym or challenge. There are a ton of these in later generations, and also the grass type, it has more weaknesses than the fire type, but also a more defensive playstyle, if that makes sense. Like grass type added to other types normally benefits that type in some form or fashion, right? Like, I mean, obviously I'm going to use the like best example off the top of my head, but like Ferrothorn is a nuts Pokemon, right? Like probably the best Pokemon for hardcore Nuzlocke, at least like the least killable Pokemon. It has 2 weaknesses, super solid bulk, gets passive recovery with Leech Seed, has a decent attack stat. You get what I'm saying here. When you add a grass type to a different type, sometimes it benefits the type. When you add fire typing to a type, unless it's like Heatran, which is not usable in any set of rules that I've ever seen, it's, you know, the fire type added to things makes it worse. Like Camerupt is a cool Pokemon, but good luck not dying to like a ground spit or like a water bubble attack. You're dead. And also just like fire types are more rare than grass and water types. So I think grass types are probably kind of in the sweet spot where the type, it kind of sucks. They're really, really weak defensively, but they have a ton of sort of like secondary type Pokemon. Like for instance, you want something that isn't weak to poison. Well, good luck. I mean, not good luck. Great. Almost all grass Pokemon are part poison, or at least early grass Pokemon are part poison. You want something that isn't weak to flying. Maybe you can get a Credilli or a Ferrothorn on your team, depending on where you're at in the game. Anyways, I think the grass is the sweet spot. I think water is easy dubs. Water is so common. There's so many very, very good water types. I think that water is probably the easiest. Like, it's way easier than fairy for sure. Probably the easiest monotype Nuzlocke you can do, I think. That's my opinion. That might change as I'm going through this list. But right now, I think it's probably the easiest. And then fire, I'm going to say fire is you're riding the struggle bus. I think it's viable because you can start off with the fire type always. There's normally not a ton of early fire types. Like if you just like go down the line and think through the generations, like in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, I don't even think you can get your second fire type until after the third gym, maybe? Or that's not true. I think you can get one from the city. And like Pokemon Gold and Silver or Crystal, you can get like a Growlithe or a Vulpix on that route to the left of the first city. I don't know the route numbers off the top of my head. And then in Gen 1, where are you getting a second fire type from in Gen 1? You're waiting a while. It's like until after the third gym, I think. I think it's like after the third gym you can get Vulpix or Growlithe. Gen 3, you're waiting a while. I think you're going to be riding the struggle bus. I think it's viable because you start with starter. Starter's typically very good. I mean, good luck doing this on Diamond and Pearl. That's kind of like the meme run, right? Only fire on Diamond and Pearl. But yeah, I think it's viable in most generations. I think it's going to be hard. Flying types, I think are easy dubs, and that might come as a shock to people. But hear me out. The flying type offensively is great. What does it not hit super effectively? Electric, rock, and steel. Steel is probably like one of the least common typings that you fight against. There are also a ton of flying types that get fire type coverage moves, so you can kind of cover that base. Steel's not super effective against flying, it just resists. Electric is super effective against flying, but there are ways to get around this. You can find grass flying Pokemon like Tropius or Rowlet. These are kind of like odd examples, but there's also things like Gligar. And in Gen 7, you get the early electric flying Oricorio, so that you're at least neutral to electric type attacks. The rock type Pokemon are really the biggest issue here for flying types, but if you find like even something as unassuming as like a Pelipper, or if you want to use Gyarados, right? Like Gyarados is busted. It's broken. It's part flying type. If you allow it, a lot of people ban it because it's so good, but if you allow it, then yeah, your flying type run's going to be easy. I think this is easy dubs. There's a high saturation of flying type Pokemon. A lot of them are good. Flying type stab attacks are really, really solid offensively. Like flying spam is a legitimate threat in competitive Pokemon, so there's no way it's not a legitimate threat in just playing through the game. Especially when you get to the more modern games and you have things like Hawlucha that you can grab really early, or even like I think you can get Sigilif before the second badge in X and Y, which is the pacing in X and Y is odd. Like the distance between the first badge and the second badge is insane, and this is nothing to do with that thought at all, but you get Zubat really early in a lot of games, and Crobat's nuts. Like Crobat is one of the best Nuzlocking Pokemon just because of its availability and what all its kit can do. I think flying is easy dubs. Maybe people disagree with that. I don't know. All right, so next up is the ghost type, and this one I think you're going to be riding the struggle bus on. I don't even think this is viable in any early generation. Like maybe Gen 4 and Platinum you get an early Rotom, or I think it's either Diamond or Pearl you get like an early Mischievous. If you allow yourself to start off with a ghost type starter, I think it's probably viable starting in Gen 3, because in Gen 3 if you start with a ghost type starter, then you can get a Sableye kind of early on after the first gym. In Gen 4, if you start with a ghost type, I think you would have to start with a ghost type starter if you want to beat the first gym. Also, this is kind of like, you know, people kind of like decide what the rules are whenever they start a run. A lot of people don't like starting with anything other than starters and what you can catch in the immediate area. I think for me, I would prefer to start off with like a type. Like I would prefer to start off with a Pokemon like that is weak in that type, like a starter. Okay, so like if I was going to do a ghost only run in Diamond and Pearl or Platinum or whatever, and the only early ghost type Pokemon was the Drifloon that you get in Valley Windworks after the first gym, I would start off with like a Duskull or a Shuppet or something, like a weaker ghost type Pokemon that will evolve into something better later, and then you fill out your team, you know, as you go, because otherwise you're beating the first gym with something that's not your type. And I don't know, for whatever reason that bugs me, and I'm not trying to criticize it because I get it. You're only trying to catch or sort of like do things that you could in a normal run through of the game, but I just like changing the starter in those instances. The moral of the story is I think the ghost type, you're going to be riding the struggle bus. There's just not enough ghosts available in most of these games, so one random crit and you're resetting. Also, the ghost type can just be hard-walled by normal types early on, which isn't great. Sometimes they can't hit you, sometimes they no bite. Like for instance, I think one of the more viable games you can do a ghost type run on is Sun Moon or Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, but your first island trial is going to be that chonky Raticate or the big the stakeout Pokemon. I don't know its name off the top of my head. 1 second. Gumshoes. I had to look that up because I've never used that Pokemon in my life. So in the generation that I think is one of the most viable, your very first island challenge is going to be incredibly tough. I don't know. I just think you're going to be riding the struggle bus. I love ghost types. They're one of my favorite types. I just think it's going to be pretty hard, but I would love to do it. This is one that I'm looking at doing. I think it's not going to be easy, but I love ghost types, so I've got to do it. I've just gotta. Ground types are next, and to me, these are some of the most boring Pokemon in the entire game, but I think that they're overall pretty decent. I think they're going to sit in sort of this sweet spot range. Normally, there's at least 1 or 2 decent early ground types. I mean, you're talking about like Geodudes in caves, Sandshrews. I think you can get like Alolan Diglets and Mudbrays in later generations. Yeah, I think the ground type is fine. I think it's good. It has access to a lot of good Pokemon. It has an immunity in electric, and any type that has an immunity is automatically going to be a little bit better. I didn't talk about that in like Flying's case or Ghost's case. Ghost, I think it's a special circumstance. It has 2 immunities, but it's going to be hard to play a Ghost type mono run. I would love to do this and be proven wrong. I still think it's going to be tough. Flying type is immune to ground, but I think Flying type is easy dubs just because of availability. Ground types, I think they're going to be in the sweet spot. I think that it's going to be easier than doing a no, it's not going to be easier than doing a mono grass, because I think that they're a little bit less common than grass type Pokemon, but I think it's going to sit in this range. Is this how I want to order this? I think so. No, I think electric might be the top of this. I think grass might be the top of the sweet spot just because of the availability. And like I said, I think that the defensive style of grass types lends them to just you playing safer. I think I'm going to put dark types probably a little bit better than electric. I think I like the way this is ordered right now. Okay. Ice types, let's get this out of the way. Low rip. This isn't viable in basically any generation. This is somewhat viable in Gen 7, if you count the Crabrawler as an ice type early. You can also catch a Smoochum early. This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare run. Everything's viable in Gen 8. You can do this in Gen 8 because of the way the wild area works. I've talked about that a couple times. I've said that multiple times. But this is nowhere close to viable in any other generation. You could get away with this in Gen 7 if you got really lucky and you didn't just get absolutely decimated by Hala, or if you made some exceptions and allowed yourself to do sort of like the SOS chaining to get a Jinx instead of catching a Smoochum. But it's a nightmare. This is a nightmare run. One, you can't get ice types early in basically any generation up until Gen 7, right? I don't think there are any early ice types in Gens 1 through 6. So unless you change the starter and then solo the game until you get your next ice type, not viable. You can't do it in any gen except for Gen 8 asterisk unless you get incredibly lucky in Gen 7 and maybe bend the rules a little bit. Normal types, though, are easy dubs. I could be wrong here. This is like very in between very good and easy dubs, because normal types can get kind of stonewalled by ghost types if you're incredibly unlucky. But you have perfect information in these runs. No, I'm going to say you can't get stonewalled by ghost types. We have perfect information in these runs. We know what we're going to be fighting against at all times. There's guides available everywhere. If you're the kind of person who thinks that using guides is bad, if that's somehow against your rules, you probably lose a lot more runs than the average person. I think that it's good that we have perfect information, and I think we should use that to our advantage, just because I think it makes it a little bit more fun. It's like a planning game at that point. It's strategy and not just, oh, I forgot that there's a ghost type trainer on this route. Let me get rolled by them. Normal types are easy because there are so many normal types, right? I think it's the second most common type after water type. It might be the most common type. I'm pretty sure it's the second most common type. Don't rate my Pokemon trivia knowledge right now. There's a lot of them. There are a lot of decent ones. I mean, you're talking about things like Tauros, Miltank, Kangaskhan. Those are kind of like the upper echelon. These are really, really strong. There are things like Persian. It's just really fast, and that's good sometimes. A lot of the early flying types, Pidgey, Trumbeak, or Picky-Peck, whatever. The little rabbit guy from Gen 6, the little Watchog guy, is that his name, Watchog? They're all decent Pokemon. Rattata's a monster. Raticate is great. It's a super early evolution. It gets like a base 80 or 90 power stab move by like level 12 or 14 or something. Normal types are good. I think that normal types are very solid. I think you'll have an easy time getting through the game, and that's I think they're much easier than these. I think this is the definitive ranking of easy dubs right now. Poison types, this is going to be probably my hottest take so far. I think poison types are very good. And hear me out for a minute before you yell at me, right? Because I think that poison types were overlooked for a very long time just because they weren't super good competitively. But there's a lot of good poison types. There are so many good poison types. In most generations, you get a couple solid poison types early on in the game, and then the poison types you can get later on in the game typically evolve into really strong things. You have a lot of good grass poison Pokemon, you have a lot of good bug poison Pokemon, and also you have a ton of good utility Pokemon to choose from. And I don't know if anyone's told you this, but one of the easiest ways to cheese any hard fight in any Nuzlocke run is just clicking Toxic and then Protect, and then you do something else and then you click Protect. It just wins games. You get Zubat super early in most games, and we've already talked about how Crobat is nuts. You have the Niddos, which are normally really early Pokemon. They're busted. Ekans is a Pokemon you can get pretty early in a lot of generations, and it has Intimidate, which is nuts. I just think that the poison type is overall very well rounded. I think if it's not very good, it's at the absolute top of sweet spot, like it's somewhere in between these two. But my personal take is I think the poison type is very good. You can think I'm wrong, and that's okay. You're entitled to that. Maybe this is my bias. I really love poison types. It's one of my favorite types. It's like poison grass and ghost for me. But I really think that the poison type is very good for monotype hardcore Nuzlockes. Moving on into the final three types, we have the psychic type, and this is one that I think some people might disagree with me on just because of how sparse they are in some generations. But if you were to even out how available psychic types are through all the generations, I think that you would find that in at least half or maybe slightly more than half of the games, they sit kind of in that sweet spot where you can get some psychic types early. There's a lot of decent psychic type encounters throughout the game. I think that this is one that I'm going to say is in the sweet spot. I think it's probably at the bottom of the sweet spot because psychic types are pretty rare. Let me think real quick off the top of my head about early psychics you can get in games, right? Like Gen 3, you can get a Ralts, obviously. Gen 2, I don't think there's an early psychic type that you can get very easily. Gen 1, you can get Abra after the first gym, so if you modify the game to where you start with the psychic type, you could technically do the challenge. Gen 4, I don't know, actually. I don't know where your first psychic type is in Gen 4. I think it's also an Abra, like before the first gym, maybe. I think in that cave or outside that cave. Gen 5, you have the Swoobats and the Muna, is that its name? Gen 6, this one's viable. I think if you change the starter, it's super viable. If you don't change the starter, you have to beat the first gym before you can get a Ralts. Gen 7, I think Gen 7 is a great one for psychic types. That's one I've got my eye on. I think that's one I want to do. And then again, everything's viable in Gen 8. I think this is in the sweet spot. I think that you can normally find like a reasonable early psychic type, and you might have to bend the rules a little bit to train it or whatever. If it's an Abra specifically, like I guess in any game where your first psychic type is an Abra, you're kind of screwed unless you get access to like hidden power early. But yeah, I think this one sits in the sweet spot. Again, probably at the bottom of the sweet spot because of the scarcity of psychic types in some generations, but I think we're mostly in the sweet spot. Rock types. Yeah, you can normally get some good rock types early. I think rock is a terrible type. Rock and ground type Pokemon bore me. I don't know what it is. I mean, I like some rock Pokemon, like I like Nihilego, and I like some ground Pokemon, like I love Nidoking and Nidoqueen. Yeah, they bore me. I just think they're boring because a lot of the early rock type Pokemon were just rocks. Sudowoodo is cool because it looks like a tree. I think this one is probably also in the sweet spot. I mean, you can't get a rock type Pokemon before the first gym in the first gen. You can in the second, so that would, it would be doable in that generation, I think. Because you could probably solo with like a Geodude and then get an Onix before the second gym, and then you have a Sudowoodo after the third gym. Yeah, I think rock type's probably really viable in Gen 2. This is probably viable in Gen 3. Maybe? I don't think you start off with a rock type, but if you change the starter, you could get one. Gen 4, this is probably viable. You can get a rock type if you can beat Rourke. Yeah, I'm gonna say this is the sweet spot. I think you can get enough early rock types in most generations. I don't think you can in Gen 5. I don't think you can get the little evolves into Gigalith. I don't know what its name is off the top of my head. I don't think you can get that Pokemon early, but I think you can get enough rock types early on in most generations to make this viable. I don't think you can do this in Gen 6. I think you can get a rock type early, but again, I think if we're kind of balancing out which generations you can do this run in and which generations you can't. Also, I'm just kind of like spitballing here if you can even catch rock type Pokemon early in a game. That's not to say you can beat the gym leader with them. I don't know that. I haven't tried the run. You go do it and figure it out. I'm going to put this one in the sweet spot, but my spidey senses are tingling and telling me that this could be somewhere in between Struggle Bus and Sweet Spot. And then we finally have Steel types, which I said earlier are one of the more rare types in games. I don't think this is viable really at all until like, what, Gen 7? Can you get an early Steel type in Gen 7? Get Magnemite. You get Magnemite early in Gen 7. I'm gonna set this back down. No, let me put it back down. I can't. Okay. You can get it early in Gen 7. There's no early Steel types. Steel types didn't exist in Gen 1. If you're playing Fire Red and Leaf Green, there's just Magnemite. So this is a solo run, right? I think that's the only Steel type. In Gen 2, not a single early Steel type. You can get Scizor if you allow trade evolutions. You can get Steelix if you allow trade evolutions. You can get Magnemite eventually. Yeah, I think this is not viable in Gen 2. In Gen 3, you can get Aeron after the first gym. So if you change the rules a little bit, maybe you can get, if you start with an Aeron and then you go catch a Mawile, this is maybe viable. Maybe, I don't know if you could beat Watson. I don't know if you could beat Flannery. Gen 4, I don't think it's an early Steel type. Gen 5, it depends on which version you're playing. You can catch Riolu early in Gen 5, but I don't know. You can get a Magnemite before like the second gym in Gen 5, I think. In Black 2, White 2, you can get a Magnemite. Gen 6, I don't think this is viable in Gen 6. I don't think there's a single Steel type Pokemon until pretty late in the game. Well, I mean, I guess if you start with a Steel type, and then in Gen 7, this is probably viable. You can get Magnemite and Alolan Diglett early. Gen 8, everything's viable. I'm going to put this in the Struggle Bus. I don't think there's enough Steel types. This might be low rip in most generations, but I think I'm going to put it in the middle here because the Ice type one, this is the only one that I think is just like flat out not viable in most generations, right? Like the overwhelming majority of Pokemon games, this is not viable in. This is probably viable in 2 to 3, maybe more if you alter the rules to where you can start off with a Steel type Pokemon. Let's go through and kind of like organize the tiers here. This is perfect. I think Fighting's better than Poison here. I think Grass, Dark, Electric's probably better than Dark, I think. Dark, Ground, Psychic, Rock. Rock is way better than these, I think. Just more common typing. Yeah, I think Rock's here. In terms of Struggle Bus, the ones that are easiest, I think Bug, just because of like access. I'm gonna slide Fire and Ghost. And then I'm gonna slide Steel above. I think Dragon it's gotta be one of the harder runs you can try. It's not even possible in most generations. And in the ones it is possible in, also, I didn't even touch on this. The Dragon types you can catch early are all really weak. Like they don't get good until their final evolution. So you're talking about like the end of the game before these Pokemon even become good. Yeah, Dragon types, you're riding the Struggle Bus hard. I would say low rip, but I think there's just enough generations where this is viable, like Gen 6, 7, and 8, that I'm gonna say like, okay, you can try it. I think before that, you're wasting your time. It's not doable unless you alter the rules immensely. Okay, this is it. This is the tier list. These are my thoughts. I think this is the definitive viability of each type in a monotype hardcore Nuzlocke setting. Let's all take a breath. Okay, so if you enjoyed this, please let me know by leaving a like. If you agree or disagree with me, let me know in the comment section down below. And also, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. It would mean the absolute most. I will have a new hardcore Nuzlocke for you next weekend. I promise, it's a banger. You just gotta wait a little while for the good things. Thank you once again to Dragon City for sponsoring this video and helping me continue to produce content. But that being said, my name is Vivid. I'm kinda done here and I have to leave. Okay, bye.